Every wise engine knows you cannot trust trucks. They live up to their name. Troublesome. Whenever there is an accident on the railway, the main culprits are usually the trucks. With their lack of intellect and conniving sense of disobedience, the trucks are a will amongst themselves. Some engines have earned their respect, and the trucks daren't play tricks on them, whilst other engines simply cannot keep them in control. Ballast trucks are by far the worst. Rude, noisy and insufferable, and that's just to start with. Over the years, Duck, Donald and Douglas have learned to handle them with care, and even Oliver, who learned the hardest lesson of all, after they push him into a turntable world, has no real cause for concern when he takes them out now. But other engines do. The trucks take full advantage of their lack of experience with them. One glorious late summer morning, the Fat Controller came to see Stanley. "Good morning, Stanley," he began. "I have important news. A large order of ballast is needing to be delivered to Barrow and Furness every day for the next month." "Good grief, that's a large order, sir," puffed Stanley, astonished. The Fat Controller chuckled. "Indeed. It will be used to reballast the mainline upgrade in Scotland. And so I need a reliable, strong pair of engines to deliver this shipment." "A pair, sir?" puffed Stanley, perplexed. "Do you mean Donald and Douglas, sir?" No. They'll be busy with their mainline duties. So you and James have been assigned to the task. I trust you two will be able to work well together." "Of course, sir. Happy to do my bit," smiled Stanley. The Fat Controller smiled, impressed at the silver tank engine's commitment to the job, and cheerfully walked away. Stanley liked James, but he knew he was one for complaining about goods work. And when he arrived at the yards, James was already grumbling. "You boiler aching already?" teased Stanley. "You bet I am!" exclaimed James. "I don't want to be going anywhere near those ballast trucks." "James, you're a mixed traffic engine. You're designed to pull goods trains half the time." "It's not the goods I'm worried about. It's the trucks themselves." "What do you mean?" asked Stanley, confused. "Ballast trucks are the worst trucks in the entire railway. I already have problems keeping trucks in line. Leave me alive and spit me out," he moaned. "Don't worry," soothed Stanley. "I'll be in the same boat as you. We can suffer together." "Trucks don't like me." On the first day, Stanley and James took 2 trains each. This would continue until the contracted shipment of ballast had been completed. Stanley soon understood why James had been so concerned in the first place. The ballast trucks were very troublesome. They clanked and bumped about roughly, making the journey very difficult and unpleasant.
"You have no right poking your furrows in here and dragging us about," they shouted. "We want Duck, or Donald, or Douglas."
"So do I," grumbled Stanley. "Save me from putting up with this torture."
"Watch it, Hot Wheels, or we'll teach you a lesson," they snapped.
"Pah!" snorted Stanley. He took no notice. James, on the other hand, was surprisingly lenient. He didn't dare bump the trucks or make them cross. They teased and taunted him, but James remained quiet. Due to the unusual motor power in charge of the ballast workings, it brought out many photographers. One, named Peter Dobbs, was well known amongst the older engine crews. He had once been a driver himself, but had retired a few years ago. Now he was an expert photographer, but his methods for capturing the perfect shot would leave a lot to be desired. Just after Calvi Station on the main line, there's a sharp curve, followed by a small gradient. This tests the driver's skill, as he must coax his engine over the gradient before reaching the junction further down. Sometimes the signal can be against them, which has led to some trains getting stuck. This had always been a favourite location for Peter Dobbs, and he planned to photograph the ballast workings here. As Stanley rounded the corner, he saw Peter Dobbs standing on the line side. "He's trespassing!" grunted Stanley. "It's only Peter. He's taking a picture," chuckled the driver. "Smile for him." Stanley did not smile, and besides he had enough to think about.
"Hold back! Hold back!
giggled the trucks. Stanley struggled on regardless. A few days later, Peter Dobbs visited Stanley's crew in the yards. He showed them his recently developed photographs. "There's some good ones here, Peter," said the driver. "Not so nice of Stanley, though," joked the fireman. "I don't think trespassing is anything to smile about," huffed Stanley firmly. "You can hardly call it trespassing when I've worked on the railway for years," replied Peter. "I know what to look out for." "But you know the railway is a dangerous place," retorted Stanley. "The unpredictable can always happen." Peter, the driver, and fireman rudely laughed in Stanley's face. The large tank engine was not impressed. "One photo didn't turn out as well, and I can't for the life of me think when I took it," said Peter, confused. The crew looked carefully. The photograph was blurred, but it showed a line of trucks appearing out of some mist and heading towards the camera. They looked as if they were about to topple over. There was also a bare tree and a broken fence in the background. "Very strange," wondered the driver. Stanley looked over at the photograph. "That looks like the same place you were trespassing." "Give it a rest, Stanley," grumbled the driver. "It can't have been taken recently. I was there a few days ago. All the trees have leaves on, there's no broken fence, and we've had clear skies," explained Peter. "I just can't put my finger on it." Stanley didn't like Peter Dobbs, and was happy when the three men had finished their conversation and he could set to work. Over the coming weeks, summer turned to autumn, and the weather changed quickly from beautiful sunshine to mist and rain. It made life on the ballast runs even more miserable.
Too slow. More power! Here all night. Tomorrow too!
"Shut up!" snapped Stanley angrily. To make matters worse, he kept seeing Peter Dobbs photographing on the line. "Lighten up, Stanley. He's not doing any harm," groaned the driver. "That is maybe, but you shouldn't encourage him. You can never be lenient on trespassing. One day he could be in real danger and he'll be too busy to notice when he's looking through his camera." The driver and fireman took no notice. The next day there was trouble. Stanley was resting in the sheds when an alarm bell rang out.
James is off the line! Get the breakdown train, quickly!
Shouted the signalman. "Oh no, poor James. I reckon those stupid ballast trucks have got him." Stanley was quickly coupled up to the breakdown train and he hurried away. When he arrived at the scene, James had come off at the sharp bend. He had derailed and crashed through the fence. No one was hurt, but James was very sore. "I knew it was only a matter of time before this would happen," sobbed James. The ballast trucks laughed smugly. They were feeling very pleased with themselves. "Idiotic things," snorted Stanley. "You could have hurt someone, or worse, killed them."
Now we can warn ourselves, Hot Wheels,
sniggered the trucks. The trucks were right. With no spare engines, Stanley had to struggle alone. The weather changed again. It grew much windier. It blew all the leaves off the trees and onto the line. It made the journey twice as hard, to the delight of the trucks.
Are we there yet? Hurry up, we're aging back here.
"Be quiet!" shouted Stanley. His patience was about to snap. He passed the sharp bend where James had derailed. Stood there was Peter Dobbs with his camera. Stanley blew steam at him. On the final day of the ballast workings, Stanley anticipated a stressful last day. He wasn't wrong. The trucks were more troublesome than ever. "Just one more day, and then that'll be it," he puffed tiredly to himself. As he departed, he had no idea the trucks had a plan to make his last day a memorable one. The mist soon descended and the pace immediately slowed. Soon they reached the sharp bend, and standing in the same place yet again was Peter Dobbs, ready with his camera. Stanley felt very uneasy. He knew he shouldn't be out on the line side in poor visibility, but he didn't want to say anything in case he'd get any more grief from his driver and fireman again. As they passed Peter, Stanley accelerated up the gradient, but out of the mist appeared the signal. It was red. Stanley's driver quickly slowed the train down and eased it to a halt on the gradient. This was the perfect opportunity for the trucks. Seconds later, the signal changed. Stanley tried to restart, but the trucks held firm.
Hold back! Hold back!
They chortled. Come on, come on, come on! Snorted Stanley. The powerful tank engine was straining hard. Its wheels slipped fiercely and steam shot into the air. The trucks laughed proudly, and suddenly the coupling snapped. Stanley raced forwards, whilst the trucks began to hurtle backwards.
On, on!
They yelled. The guard quickly slammed on the brakes, but it was no good. Out of the mist clattered the trucks, and there, posing, ready with his camera on the tight bend, was Peter Dobbs. He never saw the trucks coming. Stanley was on the other side of the gradient. His eyes widened with a sickening realization as he heard the trucks crash off the rails. The sound echoed all around. We'll have to phone for the breakdown train, sighed the driver. Don't phone them! Phone an ambulance! I saw Peter Dobbs trespassing again! Cried Stanley. Hurry! Stanley rushed to the nearest signal box, and his crew phoned for help. When they returned to the scene, the trucks had toppled over at the bend and heaps of ballast surrounded them. Stanley's driver and fireman searched the wreckage frantically. Out of the mist stepped the guard. Are you alright? Asked the fireman. The guard nodded his head silently. What about Peter? The guard slowly held up Peter's camera, which was still intact. He shook his head, quivering, and then softly muttered, crushed. A few days later, and the police were finishing their investigations. They came to see Stanley, under the supervision of the Fat Controller. We developed the photographs in Mr. Dobbs' camera. They revealed nothing apart from his photograph we found amongst his most recent collection, said the policeman. It is identical to the one he took moments before his death. Stanley went pale. His boiler nearly ran dry in fright. He remembered seeing the photograph. He also remembered seeing the bare tree through the mist and the broken fence James had crashed through. He showed that photograph to my crew, but they thought nothing of it. Peter Dobbs said he couldn't even remember taking the picture before. Intriguing, murmured the policeman. It seems he had already witnessed his own death. Constable, please. You cannot be suggesting some sort of premonition as a resolution, said the Fat Controller family. We know what happened. The fact is, he was trespassing or was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, agreed the policeman. But do you have any other explanation as to why the photograph is identical to the one taken a month later? The Fat Controller did not. Some things not even we can explain, finished the policeman gravely. The two men left, leaving Stanley feeling shocked. Stanley remained silent for several days. His driver and fireman were reprimanded for encouraging Peter Dobbs' trespassing and were suspended from the footplate for 3 months. The trucks too were silent. They were shaken up. It had finally dawned upon them that their idiocy had played a part in the death of Peter Dobbs. They now warn other trucks to take care, for their actions may have serious consequences. The other engines tried to help Stanley move on. It wasn't your fault, soothed James. You did try and warn him, added Emily. Do you think, if he had listened to me, he'd still be alive? Said Stanley. No, Stanley, replied Edward delicately. For if he had ignored what fate had shown him, then he was never going to heed your warning. He sealed his own fate. Stanley said no more.